and today it is World Mental Health Awareness Day, and because of this I thought it would be a really good opportunity to talk about some books that I think are wonderful and that have a big mix of mental illnesses in them and that focus on the main character having a mental illness or someone else in the book having a mental illness and just how they can affect people, the people suffering and the people around them, which I think is really, really important. I have general anxiety disorder, so I get really, really anxious, and I also have panic attacks and panic quite a lot, and I'm quite prone to having those in certain situations. I'm getting better with them. I have been doing different forms of CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, to look at why this is happening and the things that make me panic and think about why they make me panic, and it's been very, very helpful. And it's really, really, really helpful to have books that I can relate to and that I can see myself in the characters, and it's been really, really helpful to read so many that have that in. All the books I'm talking about today are not just about anxiety, they are lots of different mental illnesses, and I just think it's a good way to talk about these books and to talk about how important these books are and how there needs to be more of them. Disclaimer in this video, obviously I am going to be talking about issues such as depression and anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders and other types of mental illness, so if that is something that will trigger you or upset you, I don't want to do that, so don't come into this video if that is something that might upset you, because I really don't want that to happen. So the first one that I would like to talk about is The Shock of the Fall by Nathan Filer. This book is about a man called Matthew, and it's his kind of, I don't want to say descent into, but his life as he starts to develop a mental illness and starts to feel very, very, very depressed, and he has just lost his brother, and this illness is really, really, really starting to take over his life. And when you are reading it, you really, really feel how it's starting to affect him and how it's really starting to take over, and I think that this book was absolutely brilliant in that sense, and it really, really, really did a good job at depicting those feelings. And I think the issue that some books can have is that they can romanticise some mental illnesses, particularly depression and anxiety get romanticised quite a lot, and this book didn't do that at all. It really, really felt raw, and those feelings that he was having, you could really feel them and realise how much of a struggle it was. Then we have Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. This is a book that I'm sure quite a lot of people are aware of, but it's one that I wanted to talk about nonetheless. I saw the film of this before I read the book, and then for Christmas in 2013 I was given the book as a present. On Christmas Day I just sat and read the entire thing, and it's absolutely wonderful. This book is in epistolary form, so it's all in letters, and it's letters from the main character Charlie. They are entitled Dear Friend, and you never really know who Friend is. Charlie is in high school, and in the last year his best friend had committed suicide. There are lots of things in this book that Charlie is dealing with, his own mental illness and lots of things that happen within his family and the things that have affected him in his life, but he's also living with what happened to his friend. He's living with how the suicide is affecting him, which I don't think is something we see a lot in books, how suicide can affect other people. Quite a lot of books are the main character feeling suicidal, but actually when someone does commit suicide it leaves lots of people who are left with that and left with that grief and dealing with what happened, and this does that well with Charlie, as well as him dealing with his own mental illness and lots of things that are happening in his life. The thing with this book as well is because it's written in letter form, you never really know what's happening until Charlie specifically tells you what has happened and what is going on, so you never really know what's next. But I think this book is absolutely beautiful. It's very, very, very raw and real, and it doesn't sugarcoat anything, and it just says things how it is and how life is, and I think having Charlie narrate it in the way that he does really adds to that and really does make you feel like it's very real and just happening, and I cannot recommend this book enough. I think it's really important that we have these books that are raw and that are real and don't sugarcoat or romanticize anything, because it's really important that we realize what it is like to have these mental illnesses and to not just skim over and just talk about the things that people know about them or kind of romanticize them or make love and things take them away, because that isn't the reality. Another book which is kind of similar to that one in the case of someone has committed suicide and it's what's happened afterwards is 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher. This book is not about the main character having a mental illness or feeling suicidal or committing suicide, but it's about a girl who was in his class who he knew called Hannah, who has committed suicide, and she leaves a box of 13 tapes, which is 13 reasons why she has killed herself, that she has arranged to be sent around to the people that are the reasons, and so she can explain these reasons. And the thing that I really, really, really thought was important about this is the what you do and what you say to people, you never know how it can affect them, and you have to live with that for the rest of your life. Just the aftermath of suicide and how many people it can affect and how many people can be affected, but then you also see her feelings as well and what she was dealing with and what she was going through, and you hear that through the tape. And I just think this book's really, really important for lots of people, for people to think about what their actions can do and to think about what could happen with people and what you say to people and how that can really, really affect them. It's really real, and it's just very, very real and very, very touching. I really, really, really cannot recommend it enough. The next books that I'd like to talk about are by the same author, but the books are very, very different. The first book is The Impossible Knife of Memory by Laurie House Anderson, and she is one of my favourite authors. She also wrote Speak and Winter Girls, which I have on my Kindle, which is the next book that I'm going to talk about. And I think this book is really, really interesting because it's not about the main character having a mental illness. It's about a girl called Hayley, and her dad is really suffering from PTSD from fighting the war in Iraq, and they move around because he can't stay in one place. He's constantly struggling with this PTSD and how it's affecting him. They move back into the town where he grew up, and Hayley starts to attend school, and it's meeting new people and starting to build those foundations and settling down, but there's still so much that her dad is dealing with, and she has to deal with this as well and deal with what has come out of this PTSD and how he is handling things and how he is dealing with things. I think it's really, 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 really important that books like this exist. It's absolutely fantastic, and the struggles that Hayley is going through you can really, really feel, and the struggles that her dad is going through you can really, really feel as well. PTSD is a very, very real thing, and it's very, very, very common in people that have fought in the war and people that have come back, because the things that they are experiencing and seeing are absolutely terrible and horrible things, and it's something that should not be dismissed, and it's something that needs to be spoken about because they need the help. This book really, really shows those struggles, but it also shows the struggles of how that can affect everyone around you as well. Laurie House Anderson constantly does that. Her books have really, really, really strong subjects in them, and subjects that are not the happiest, but they're very real, and it's very, very important. The other book that of hers that I was about, like I said, I have it on my Kindle, is Winter Girls, and this book is about two friends, Leah and Cassie, who both have eating disorders, and it's kind of, they sort of see it as a competition who can be the skinniest and who can lose the most weight. The thing with eating disorders, and the thing that I don't think is spoken about quite a lot, and there are lots of different forms of eating disorders, and they can affect people in different ways, and there are different types, but one thing that does not get spoken about enough is that eating disorders can kill you. And unfortunately in this book, Cassie does succumb to that, and her eating disorder does kill her. Leah is still left then with her eating disorder, but also the grief of losing her friend, and still trying to deal with this while going into starting her recovery. And if anyone has ever had any kind of mental illness, you'll know that recovery is not an easy process. You do not go into somewhere and then leave feeling so much better. You have to constantly work at it. You will relapse. There is so much going on to recovery, as well as her having this eating disorder and not wanting to get help, and also dealing with the loss of her friend. Lots is going on in her life. This book felt very, very real. It also shows how the eating disorder can affect people around her. I was reading this book, I just felt like she'd completely done it again. She'd done a really, really good job at representing this illness in a correct way, not romanticizing it, not making it seem like something that could easily be fixed. There is a constant struggle throughout this book, but I think that that's a good thing because it really shows what this illness can do to people and how it can affect people. Then we have A Rose Tainted Skies by Louise Gornall. This is one of the most recent books that I have read, and it is about a girl called Nora who is agoraphobic and cannot leave her house. She also has OCD and panic disorder tendencies and suffers from panic attacks, and let me tell you, as someone who has panic attacks regularly and suffers from them quite badly sometimes, the representation of them in this was really, really, really accurate. The thing that I really, really hate is when people assume that panic attacks you just get a bit sort of flustered and a bit worried and a bit anxious about something, and that's not the case at all. You feel like you're dying. Panic attacks are terrifying. It is absolutely terrifying. I cannot really explain it properly if you haven't ever had one, but they feel horrible. For those moments you are just not, when I would have them at school, when I'd have them at uni and I'd be by myself, they are really not fun to have. They are just absolutely terrifying. I wouldn't wish them on my worst enemy. The representation of them in this is absolutely brilliant, and the OCD and the anxious thoughts and the worrying, it was really, really, really well done, and just really thought Nora gets a new neighbour in this book and she meets him, and at first I was thinking, please don't just fall in love with him and then it will be better. Please don't just assume that that will make everything better, and it doesn't. And she says that, and she says, you cannot just love this out of me, it's not going to go away. She doesn't like him like touching her, like she doesn't want to kiss him or hold his hand, and that doesn't just go away. That's not just going to vanish just because she now has a boyfriend. And it's really, really good representation of you cannot love something out of someone, you just have to love them through it and just be there and support them through everything, through the relapses, through the recovery, through the therapy. And it's good because when you come into this book you go straight into her life, and she is in therapy and she is seeing a therapist, and you see the struggle of her even getting out of the house into the car to go and see the therapist, and she has to have one of the sessions in the car because she can't get out of the car to go into the therapist's office. And it's just I just thought it was a really, really good representation of these different types of mental illness and just how they affect people, but also how they affect her mum who is looking after her, and how they affect the people around her, and the fact that she's like isolated herself from everyone at school and going into a relationship, how it's going to affect that. I just could not put this book down. I was just reading and reading and reading, and I just thought this is one of the most accurate representations of a mental illness in a book that I've ever read. And then we have It's Kind of a Funny Story by Ned Vizzini, and this is actually one of the first books about mental illness that I ever read. I absolutely loved it. It's about a boy called Craig. He wants to succeed in his life. He wants to go into the right school, a good school, and get the right job and just live his life, and he gets very, very, very overwhelmed by this. Really, really panics, can't deal with it. Pressure becomes so much, he stops eating and then he tries to kill himself. He doesn't succeed, but the fact that he ends up going into a psychiatric hospital. It's all about the people that he meets there, the different range of people that he comes into contact with, and the friends he makes and the people that he meets. And it's all about exploring lots of different mental illnesses, but also the good of psychiatric hospitals, but also the bad of them and how they can affect you in negative ways as well as positive ways. And it's just his journey in that. We meet him at a time of his life where he thinks he has everything under control, and then we see just how quickly that can change and just how quickly these things can affect you. But it also shows in the psychiatric hospital the different stages that people are at and the different stages of recovery, and that relapse is a thing. It shows a really big range and a really important range of just who's in there and these different mental illnesses and how they can affect people and people around them and the things that it can lead to. So I really, really, really love this. The next two books I'm going to talk about are actually non-fiction books. The first one is If You Feel Too Much by Jamie Turoski. I can never say his last name, I'm so sorry. For those of you that have been following my channel for a while, you will know that I really, really, really support and love the charity To Write Love on Her Arms. They are a non-profit organisation which help people with mental illnesses, suicide, addiction, and they are absolutely wonderful. They have done so much. They have just changed the lives of so many people. I'll link their website below because I think that they are wonderful. I always like to try and donate to them and get involved with fundraisers that they do, and I just think they're brilliant. Anyway, the founder of that, Jamie, he wrote this book. Throughout this book he talks about different things, suicide, rehab, relapsing, different types of mental illness, addictions, all these different things, and how sort of his experience with different things, people he knows experiences with this. The thing I felt when I was reading this was kind of like this reassurance of that you're not the only person, you're not alone, you know, it isn't just you. There are so many people dealing with these things and dealing with them in different ways, and you're not always going to be at the same stage. Some people might be near the end of their recovery, some people might be at the very, very beginning, but that's okay, and you're not any less because of that. I feel like this book was a real reassurance, but also important to read because it does inform you about things and does talk with you about very serious things and doesn't undermine the seriousness of them and doesn't undermine the importance of them, but is also reassuring in the sense of you are not alone and you don't have to feel ashamed about this, and it's okay to talk about it, and we should be talking about it. I loved this. I absolutely loved it. And the next non-fiction book is Reasons to Stay Alive by Matt Haig, and this book is about is his story of depression and him suffering with depression, and he basically just talks in this book about how it felt when it came on and how it came out of nowhere really, and that it wasn't any particular event that set it off, because it isn't always that. It can just happen. He's talking about how he didn't know how to deal with it, and he'd spend this time in bed and he just didn't want to move, he just didn't want to do anything. But then it's also his journey through recovery and the people around him and how he was affecting the people around him, but also how they could help him. It's really a personal story from someone who has dealt with this in such a big way and how it impacted his life for so long, but to see him now, it isn't the be all and end all. You're not just going to be diagnosed with it and then that's going to be it for the rest of your life. To see someone's story like that, and it's so honest and raw and open, and it doesn't sugarcoat anything. He talks about the horrors of it and just how awful it really was, but so also shows what it's like now, and I think that that's really important. I've got 3 honorary mentions, so this is the main final book, and then I'm going to talk about the honorary mentions. The final book is The Dead House by Dawn Keita. This is the most recent book I have just finished, and whilst this book does get very kind of supernaturally and spirity and Ouija boardy near the end, the main premise is this girl called Carly who is around in the day, and then she has dissociative identity disorder, and at night time her alter Caitlin comes out, and it's that they are 2 completely different people. They do different things. I haven't really read a book that had a dissociative identity disorder in it, and I feel like even though this did have kind of other elements to it as well, it was a really good way of, it really did sort of feel like it was exploring that and the struggles that they have, and her friend, they don't know about Caitlin, and then when they meet her, and it just really shows sort of that different idea of not wanting to get help because they do sort of see themselves as sisters. It's definitely something I'd like to read more of and more representations of, because it's something I've learnt a lot about in my degree, and something that I know that lots of people can suffer with, and that it can really affect people, and people are just sort of seen as crazy when actually Carly is fully functioning and she can go to school and do lots of things and she's fine. And it's just this really, I feel like it was a more accurate representation. If you take away all the supernatural and spirit elements to it, it just really shows sort of how people perceive you when you're considered to be crazy, especially near the front half of the book. Like I said, it gets weird, but in the front half of the book it really did show that, and that Carly is just this sort of normal girl in school, really. So yeah. And the honorary mention, the first one is The Casual Vacancy by J.K. Rowling. This book is essentially not about mental illness. It's about a guy who has an aneurysm and leaves a vacancy on the parish council, and it's who wants to fill that. In this book, however, there is kind of sub-stories between all the characters, so you constantly flip back to different characters in their lives, and there's a character called Terry who is a drug addict, and a very bad drug addict. She's heavily addicted, and she's been in and out of programs, in and out of different kinds of therapy, and she has a 16-year-old daughter called Crystal and a little boy who is 4 or 5, I believe, and he is not being looked after brilliantly, and Crystal has to deal with pretty much everything. They're getting visits from the social workers and with different people and child protection services, but Crystal is constantly trying to keep her brother with her and her mum, but constantly trying to help her mum, and it really showed the struggles that a young person would have looking after, because addiction is obviously, it is something that happens, and it can really affect different people's lives, and it's not always adults' lives who it affects, and it just really sort of showed the struggle of Crystal and her life, and trying to deal with everything around her while trying to help her family and her brother and her mum and everything else that comes out of that. And when I was reading this, I have real mixed opinions on this book, and I have real mixed opinions on the ending of this book, and I don't necessarily think it was one of my favourite books ever. But when I was reading it, Crystal's story and her and how she dealt with everything and just how badly it affected her was the one that really stuck with me the most, because I feel like that's something we don't see a lot of, and we don't get to see. It's the same with The Impossible Knife of Memory. I think it's really important because children can be really affected by their parents as well, and what their parents are going through, and I think that was one of the most important things within this book. The other one that gets an honorary mention is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. At the surface, this book is a contemporary book, and it's about a girl called Kath. She really writes fan fiction, and she's going into her first year of uni or college because she's American. She has a twin, but they're not going to be sharing with each other, and she has to learn to meet a new roommate. But actually Kath is very sort of self-isolating, and she likes to keep by herself, and she's not really sure how to make friends and how to branch out of her comfort zone, and she does you can feel that she gets quite anxious, and this was something that I read in my first year of uni and was like, yes, and just really could feel out what she was feeling and what was going on. It was something that I really just couldn't, when I put it down, I was like, she just felt like me, and everything that she had, it just really felt like that. So I think it's definitely one that people who are very sort of introverted, but in a way where they really struggle to socialise with people and really struggle to sort of go out and introduce themselves to new people, and also that anxiety and those feelings of anxiety and being anxious, are definitely very present in this book and something that I did pick up on and did really relate to. So yes, those are my book recommendations for Mental Health Awareness Day. I wanted to talk about them. I think it's really, really important that we keep having forms of, you know, books, literature, media that does represent these in a correct way and doesn't romanticize things and doesn't sugarcoat things and shows all different variations of a mental illness and not just the stereotypes that we have and not just the main things that people tend to focus on. I think it's really important that we have all these different variations and all these different ranges of how these things can affect us and also people around us, because they are very real things that affect so many people. There are obviously so many more that I have read that I loved, but I just want to talk about some of my main favourites. If there are any that you have read that you think are really good and that should be spoken about more, please let me know down in the comments. If you are new here, I make bookish videos a couple of times a week, so if you would like to stick around and join us, then you can do that. And as usual, all of my links will be in the description below if you would like to come hang out with me on other social medias. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you're doing really, really well, and I will see you next time. Goodbye!